Hey there. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something pretty big, American democracy. We've got some fascinating excerpts from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America to help guide us.
Oh, yeah.
Ever heard of him?
He was a French aristocrat who traveled across America in the 1830s trying to make sense of this brand new experiment in democracy. What's amazing is how relevant his observations still are.
It's kind of mind-blowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this guy saw something in the American system that goes beyond all the day-to-day political drama
Yeah.
that we see in the headlines. He might have even seen why the American system is so strong and how it manages to work, even with leaders who aren't, shall we say, the best and brightest.
Yeah, that's where Tocqueville's insights get really interesting. He noticed something about American democracy that was fundamentally different from what he knew in Europe. It was decentralized. Power wasn't concentrated in one place, like with a king or a parliament.
Okay.
Instead, it was spread out across different levels, federal, state, county, even down to these things called townships.
Okay, so imagine this power is like this network spread throughout the whole country.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for how things work day to day? Like, how would that affect a politician who maybe isn't the sharpest tool in the shed?
Well, that's the genius of the system, Tocqueville observed, because power is so diffused, no single person, not even the president, has absolute control. Everyone's influence is checked by other institutions.
Right.
And by different levels of government, it limits the potential damage any one person can do.
So it's like a built-in safeguard against, well, bad leadership. That's kind of reassuring in a weird way.
Yeah, it's like a safety net woven into the very structure of the government.
Right.
And Tocqueville saw this as a key to American stability.
Okay.
But he also identified another potential problem in democracies,
Okay.
the tyranny of the majority.
Okay, that sounds intense. What does that even mean? Tyranny of the majority.
Imagine a situation where the majority gets to decide everything.
Right.
With no limits.
Right.
They could easily trample the rights of minorities. Or individuals who hold different views. Tocqueville was really worried about this inherent risk in any democratic system.
That makes sense. So how did America, even way back then, avoid this potential pitfall?
Tocqueville noticed several checks and balances that were cleverly built into the American system.
Yeah.
He was particularly impressed by the judiciary, the court system.
Okay.
It was designed to be independent, not swayed by political pressure or the whims of the majority. If a law, even one supported by most people, violates individual rights, the courts can step in and say, nope, not happening.
It's like having a referee who can call out fouls.
Yeah.
Even if the crowd is cheering for the player who broke the rule.
Exactly. And Tocqueville saw this as essential for protecting individual liberties.
Okay.
But he also observed another check on the potential tyranny of the majority, the legal profession itself.
Lawyers. How do they fit into all of this?
Tocqueville saw lawyers as a kind of counterweight to the sometimes fleeting passions of the masses. They're trained to think logically, to base their arguments on precedent and established principles. They act as a sort of mediating force, making sure reason and fairness aren't tossed aside just because popular opinion is running hot on some issue.
So lawyers are like the voice of reason, injecting some calm and logic into the system. That's not an image you see on TV very often, but I kind of like it.
It's a crucial role, and it speaks to the subtle but powerful ways the American system is designed to prevent any one group or idea from dominating the political landscape.
Okay.
And Tocqueville didn't stop there. He also saw something unique in the American concept of localism, particularly the township system.
Townships. What are those exactly?
Think of them as these hyperlocal units of government
where
citizens are directly involved in making decisions that affect their daily lives. It's like democracy at its most grassroots level. Tocqueville called townships schools of freedom because they fostered a sense of civic responsibility and direct engagement in the process of governing.
It's kind of like a training ground for democracy. You start small, get involved in your local community, and learn how the system works from the ground up.
Precisely. And this direct involvement helps to counterbalance the potential for apathy or detachment that can sometimes arise in larger, more bureaucratic systems. But what really fascinated Tocqueville was the way American ambition played into all of this.
Okay, so we know Americans are ambitious. Did Tocqueville see this as a good thing or a bad thing for democracy?
He saw it as both, actually. He was struck by how much of that ambition was directed towards commerce and industry rather than purely towards political power. He linked this to the American spirit of individual success and wealth creation.
So it's not just about who's in charge, but about building things.
Yeah.
Creating things, achieving financial success.
And Tocqueville saw this as a kind of pressure valve for the system.
Yeah.
It meant that not everyone was constantly vying for political office. They were finding other outlets for their energy and ambition, which actually helped to stabilize the political landscape. But he didn't see Americans as purely materialistic either. He observed a fascinating balance.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of balance are we talking about?
He noticed periods of intense spiritualism, especially on the frontier where people were grappling with the challenges of building a new life. So he saw this constant push and pull between material success and a deeper yearning for something more.
It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth, right? Pragmatism on one side, idealism on the other, constantly shaping and reshaping the American spirit. Now, I've got to ask about this phrase, self-interest, well understood.
Yeah.
What did Tocqueville mean by that?
This is where Tocqueville gets really insightful.
Yeah.
He wasn't advocating for pure selfishness. He was talking about a kind of enlightened self-interest where people understand that by pursuing their own betterment, they actually contribute to the common good.
So it's like if everyone focuses on improving their own lives,
yeah,
the whole society benefits. I can see how that could work, but it also seems kind of idealistic.
That's the paradox Tocqueville was trying to capture. He saw this principle as a powerful engine for progress in America.
So it's not about being selfless, but about understanding that individual success can be a building block for something bigger.
And that's a key insight into how Tocqueville saw the American experiment unfolding individual drive and collective progress, all intertwined in this complex, sometimes messy, but ultimately resilient system. Now, speaking of messy, Tocqueville was also fascinated by the role of the American judiciary.
Yeah, he seemed almost obsessed with lawyers and judges. What was that all about?
Remember, he was coming from a European perspective,
okay,
where the legal system was often seen as an arm of the monarchy or the aristocracy.
Right.
But in America, he saw something completely different. He saw a system where the courts played a crucial role in protecting individual liberty and limiting the power of the government, even if that government was democratically elected.
So the courts weren't just about interpreting laws, but about protecting people from tyranny.
Exactly. And this was a radical idea at the time. Tocqueville recognized that a truly free society needed a strong, independent judiciary to ensure that the rights of individuals were respected. Even if those rights conflicted with the will of the majority, it was a way to ensure that even the most popular policies wouldn't trample on the fundamental rights of individuals. And this idea, it's still at the heart of many of the most important legal debates in America today.
It's incredible how relevant Tocqueville's observations remain. It's like he saw the blueprint of American democracy and how it would evolve. Now, speaking of things that shape public discourse, we can't forget about the press. Tocqueville had a lot to say about that, right?
He did. Even back in the 1830s, before social media or the 24-hour news cycle, he recognized the huge influence newspapers had in shaping public opinion and keeping those in power accountable.
I'm picturing these little printing presses churning out newspapers in every town.
Yeah.
What did he think about the American press? Was he impressed or kind of horrified by what he saw?
A bit of both, actually. He was struck by how many newspapers there were, each with its own distinct voice and perspective. He saw this diversity as a safeguard against any one group controlling the narrative.
So kind of like a chaotic but necessary antidote to propaganda.
Exactly. But he also saw the downsides. He criticized American journalists for lacking formal education and for favoring sensationalism over, well, good journalism.
Ouch. Sounds like a burn from a sophisticated Frenchman.
It was a different time, of course. But even with those criticisms, he recognized that a free and energetic press, even if it wasn't always perfect, was essential for a healthy democracy.
It's like that saying, democracy is messy, but it's better than the alternative. Now, Tocqueville also delved into American political life itself. He seemed particularly interested in how ambition played out in this new democratic system.
He observed that while Americans were clearly ambitious, it wasn't always purely about political power. A lot of that energy was directed towards commerce and industry, toward building wealth and achieving individual success.
So it wasn't just about who was in charge, but about who was building the next big thing, who was making a name for themselves.
He saw this as a unique feature of American democracy. This drive to succeed, to create, acted as a kind of stabilizing force. It meant that not everyone was constantly fighting for a seat at the political table.
That's a fascinating idea. It's almost like spreading the ambition around so it doesn't get too concentrated in one place. But didn't he also have concerns about that focus on material wealth?
He did. He worried that a society solely focused on getting rich could lose sight of deeper values. But he also observed a fascinating counterbalance to this materialism.
What do you mean?
He noted periods of intense religious revivalism, especially on the frontier, where people were confronting the harsh realities of building a new life. He saw this back and forth between worldly ambition and a yearning for spiritual meaning as a defining characteristic of the American spirit.
It's like a constant tension between those two impulses, right? It makes you wonder how that tension plays out in American society today. Now, we can't talk about Tocqueville's observations without addressing one of the most painful and complex issues in American history, slavery.
He couldn't ignore it, and he didn't. He called slavery an egregious violation of human rights, and he grappled with its implications for the future of American democracy.
But he also seemed to have some complex, even troubling views on the possibility of abolishing slavery. What was that about?
He was deeply concerned about the racial prejudice and social divisions that were at the core of the institution of slavery. He saw that even in the North, where slavery had been abolished, discrimination against Black people was still widespread.
So it wasn't just about ending slavery on paper, but about dismantling a whole system of racial hierarchy and oppression.
He believed that bringing millions of formerly enslaved people into American society as equal citizens would be an enormous challenge, and he worried about the potential for violence and social unrest.
He seemed to have this almost prophetic sense of the challenges that lay ahead.
And those challenges continue to resonate in America today. Tocqueville saw the legacy of slavery as a stain on the American experiment, a problem that wouldn't easily be erased. But beyond that, he also had some interesting thoughts about the impact of equality on American culture and society.
Okay, so equality is like the bedrock of American democracy. What did Tocqueville see as its potential downsides?
He recognized that while equality was a powerful force for good, it could also lead to a kind of leveling down of pressure to conform and avoid standing out from the crowd.
So it's like equality can empower, but it can also create this pressure to fit in, to not be too different.
Exactly. He worried that a society obsessed with equality might discourage people from pursuing truly exceptional achievements or challenging conventional wisdom. He saw this tendency in what he called the tyranny of the majority, where the pressure to conform to popular opinion could stifle dissent and independent thought.
It's like that saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Ah.
So how did Tocqueville see Americans navigating that tension between individual expression and the pressure to conform?
Well, he was particularly interested in the American concept of self-reliance. He saw it as a defining characteristic of Americans, this deep-seated belief in one's ability to shape one's own destiny.
It's like the classic American dream, right? Anyone, regardless of background, can succeed through hard work and determination.
But he also recognized the potential downsides of this relentless individualism. He worried that it could lead to a weakening of social bonds and a decline in civic engagement.
So it's like a double-edged sword. Individualism can be empowering, but it can also make people feel isolated and less connected to their community.
He observed that Americans were very practical. They were quick to join associations and work together to achieve specific goals, but those collaborations were often temporary and transactional.
So it's like teamwork, but with an expiration date.
He also noticed a certain restlessness and impatience in the American character, a desire for quick results and instant gratification.
It's amazing how some of his observations from the 1830s sound like he's describing modern American society.
It speaks to his ability to see the underlying patterns and tendencies that shape a culture, but he also recognized the potential for these tendencies to go too far. He worried about what he called soft despotism, a kind of subtle tyranny that could arise when people become too comfortable with conformity and too dependent on a centralized government to manage every aspect of their lives.
So it's not about dictators or tanks in the streets, but a more insidious loss of freedom, a slow erosion of individual initiative. It's almost like trading liberty for comfort and security.
And he saw excessive materialism as another threat. He argued that a society obsessed with wealth and consumption could lose sight of higher values and become vulnerable to manipulation by those who control the levers of economic power.
It's a warning that feels especially relevant today, with all the concerns about income inequality and the influence of big corporations. Did Tocqueville offer any solutions to these potential threats to American democracy?
He believed the best defense was a vibrant civil society, a network of associations and institutions that foster community, encourage civic engagement, and provide a counterbalance to the power of the state. He saw these groups, churches, clubs, volunteer organizations as essential for preserving liberty and preventing the concentration of power in the hands of a few.
It's like a web of interconnected threads, each one representing a different part of civic life, all working together to hold the fabric of society together.
He believed that these intermediate institutions, as he called them, were crucial for cultivating the habits of heart and mind that are essential for a healthy democracy.
It makes you think about the role of community organizations and activism in today's world.
Yeah.
Are they carrying on that legacy that Tocqueville saw as so important?
It's a question worth pondering. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into Tocqueville's democracy in America, I'm struck by how much his work from almost 200 years ago speaks to the challenges we still face today.
It's a reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in the messy, complicated business of self-government. It's like he's reminding us that democracy is this living, breathing thing, and it's up to us to keep it healthy. You know, one thing I found really interesting was Tocqueville's take on how democracy affects the arts.
Yes. He had some fascinating observations about how democratic values and social structures shape cultural expression. For example, he argued that democracies tend to favor a more practical and relatable approach to the arts. Less focus on grand historical epics, more on stories that resonate with the everyday experiences of ordinary people.
So instead of like operas about kings and queens, it's more about plays that reflect the lives of, say, shopkeepers or farmers.
Precisely. He also noticed a shift in language, a move towards simpler and more direct forms of expression. He argued that in democratic societies, eloquence and complexity often take a back seat to accessibility and clarity.
That makes me think about the rise of social media and the way we communicate online. Brevity and impact seem to be the name of the game now. It's like he predicted this whole shift in how we use language.
It's remarkable how prescient some of his observations were, but he didn't just focus on the positive aspects of democracy. He also identified some potential threats, things that could undermine the very foundations of a democratic society.
Okay, so what were some of the danger zones he saw on the horizon?
He was particularly worried about what he called soft despotism. Imagine a society that becomes so comfortable with conformity, so dependent on a centralized government to manage every aspect of life, that it loses its capacity for independent thought and action.
So it's not about overt tyranny, but a more subtle form of control where people willingly give up their freedom for the sake of comfort and security. Kind of like being lulled into complacency.
Exactly. It's a slow, insidious erosion of liberty, and Tocqueville saw it as a real danger in democratic societies. He also warned against excessive materialism, arguing that a society obsessed with wealth and possessions could lose sight of higher ideals, making it vulnerable to manipulation by those who control the economy.
That sounds eerily familiar, especially in today's world. It makes you wonder, are we too focused on what we buy and own and not enough on the things that really matter?
Tocqueville believed that a society that loses its moral compass, that places material wealth above all else, risks losing its soul. He saw this as a slippery slope towards social decay and ultimately the collapse of democratic institutions.
So what's the antidote? What can we do to safeguard ourselves against these potential threats to democracy?
Tocqueville believed the most effective defense was a strong and vibrant civil society, a network of associations and institutions that foster a sense of community, encourage active citizenship, and provide a counterbalance to the power of the state.
It's like building a web of connections, right? Churches, clubs, volunteer organizations, all these groups working together to create a sense of shared purpose and responsibility.
He saw these groups as crucial for cultivating the habits of heart and mind that are essential for a healthy democracy. They teach people how to work together, how to solve problems, how to hold each other accountable, all without relying solely on the government.
So it's about active participation, about taking ownership of our communities and our democracy. It's not enough to just sit back and expect someone else to fix things for us.
Tocqueville believed that apathy and complacency were the greatest enemies of a free society. He saw democracy as a constant work in progress, something that requires ongoing effort and vigilance from every citizen.
You know, as we're talking about all of this, I'm struck by how much wisdom there is in Tocqueville's observations. It's like he had this crystal ball that allowed him to see the challenges we're facing today.
His insights into the nature of democracy, the tensions between individual liberty and the common good, the importance of civic engagement, all of these things remain incredibly relevant even in the 21st century.
It's a reminder that democracy is not something we can take for granted. It requires constant attention, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with the messy, complicated realities of self-government. It's not always easy, but it's the best system we've got, and it's worth fighting for.
Tocqueville understood that democracy is a fragile thing, and he challenged us to be vigilant guardians of our own freedoms. He reminded us that the pursuit of a more perfect union is an ongoing journey, one that requires constant effort, thoughtful reflection, and a deep commitment to the principles of liberty and equality.
So as we go about our busy lives, let's try to keep Tocqueville's words in mind. Let's be engaged citizens, critical thinkers, active participants in the great experiment of American democracy.
And let's remember that the future of our democracy rests not just on the shoulders of our leaders, but on each and every one of us.
Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive into Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.